The sun over the Arizona territory burned like a forge, turning the horizon into molten copper. Clara Whitmore shaded her eyes against the glare as the wagon train crawled along the dusty trail. Her father rode ahead on a mule, a small spare man with a Bible tucked beneath his arm and missionary purpose in his heart. They had left Boston's stone streets to bring light to the frontier, though Clara, at 22, had begun to wonder if the desert needed their salvation at all. The land stretched forever, wild and endless. Cacti stood like watchmen, and in the heat haze the air shimmered as if the world were breathing. They had been warned not to travel through Apache country without an escort, but Reverend Whitmore's faith was stronger than his caution. "The Lord is our protection," he had said that morning. The driver cracked his whip and the wheels creaked onward. The first sign of danger came with the wind. It carried a cry, faint, high, and unlike anything Clara had ever heard. A hawk's scream? No. It came again, multiplied until it was clear. War whoops rolling across the canyons. The settlers barely had time to draw rifles. A flash of movement burst from the ridges, riders painted in streaks of red and black, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. Bullets whined. The air filled with chaos. The crash of gunfire, the shriek of panicked animals, the splintering of wood. Clara's world turned to noise and smoke. She tried to reach her father but saw him fall beside the wagon. His Bible lay open in the dirt, its pages fluttering in the wind. A hand seized her arm, strong, calloused, pulling her from the wreckage. She fought, twisting and striking, but her captor didn't raise a weapon. He lifted her like a doll and threw her onto the back of a horse. Clara screamed until her throat burned, but her voice was swallowed by thunder of hooves. The Apache riders vanished into the desert, leaving the smoldering wagons behind. Hours later, when the world stopped spinning, she found herself in a narrow canyon surrounded by red rock. The sun had fallen, replaced by the cool blue of twilight. Her wrists were bound, her hair tangled and full of dust. Her captor crouched nearby, tying his horse to a branch. He was young, perhaps 30, with sharp features and a bearing that carried quiet authority. A single eagle feather hung from his hair. When their eyes met, Clara felt the shock of his intensity. Not cruelty, but something older, wilder. Why have you taken me?" she demanded. Her voice trembled, though she tried to hide it. He didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his English was rough but clear. "You are the daughter of the preacher?" "Yes," she whispered. "Good." He rose to his full height. "Then you are worth something." Her heart pounded. "You mean to ransom me?" He looked away toward the distant mesas. "My brother is a prisoner in your fort. You will help bring him back, and if I refuse?" His gaze returned to her, steady and unreadable. "Then you will still stay." That night, Clara lay near the campfire, her wrists freed, but watched closely. The desert was colder than she expected. The wind cut through her thin dress, raising gooseflesh. She watched the man, her captor, move silently as he fed the fire and cleaned his rifle. Every movement was measured, efficient, purposeful. When he finally sat across from her, she summoned her courage. "What is your name?" "Taza," he said. "Of the Chiricahua." "I'm Clara Whitmore." "I know." They sat in silence, the flames flickering between them. The firelight carved his face into hard lines, cheekbones like stone, eyes catching reflections of gold. Despite her fear, Clara sensed something restrained about him, as though violence were a language he no longer wanted to speak. She dared a question. "Why attack the wagons?" "We meant you no harm." His jaw tightened. "Your soldiers burned our village 2 moons ago. Took my brother to the fort at Tucson. You bring your prayers," he said bitterly, "and they bring guns. Which is worse?" Clara had no answer. The stories she'd grown up hearing about Indian savages crumbled under the weight of his grief. When dawn came, they rode deeper into Apache territory. The landscape changed from open plains to canyons streaked with color, rust, gold, ochre. Despite her fear, Clara couldn't help but marvel. It was as if the desert itself was alive, painted by an unseen hand. Taza didn't speak much, but he treated her with a strange, quiet respect. He never struck her or mocked her, and when her horse stumbled, he steadied it without comment. Still, she knew she was his captive, caught between mercy and menace. At midday, they paused by a creek. Clara drank greedily from her cupped hands, the water cold and clean. When she looked up, Taza was watching her, not as a man watches a prize, but with curiosity. You are not afraid now? He asked. I am, she admitted, but fear cannot ride forever. For a moment he almost smiled. By evening they reached the Apache camp, a cluster of lodges nestled in the rocks. Dozens of eyes turned toward her as they entered. Women gathered children closer. Men watched with guarded hostility. Clara felt their stares like arrows, but Taza said something in his language and they lowered their weapons. He led her to a small tent and gestured inside. You stay here. Do not run. There is nowhere to go. She stepped in, heart pounding, and sat on the ground. Through the flap she could see him talking to an older man, perhaps the chief. Their tones were tense, low. Occasionally someone glanced at her with distrust. She could feel herself being weighed, measured, judged. As night fell, hunger and exhaustion claimed her. A woman brought her food, a bowl of roasted corn and beans. Clara murmured thanks, though she wasn't sure the woman understood. Outside, the campfire songs began, low chants that blended with the sighing wind. She thought of her father's last sermon, of the hymns they had sung. We are all God's children, he had said. But here, under the wild sky, Clara wondered if those words had ever truly meant anything. Later, Taza came to check on her. He crouched in the doorway, his shadow stretching across the dirt. You will not be harmed, he said. My people think you bring trouble, but I will see that none touch you. Why? She asked softly. He met her gaze. Because I do not harm what I take care of. Then he was gone, leaving her to the night, to the sound of distant drums and the ache of a heart that didn't yet understand its own beginning. Days bled into one another in the Apache camp, measured not by clocks or church bells, but by the rhythm of wind and firelight. Clara Whitmore learned quickly that survival here required silence, observation, and a kind of humility she'd never known. Yet within her quietness lived defiance, a spark that refused to die even in captivity. Taza kept his distance after the raid. He gave orders to the others, spoke rarely to her, and never entered her tent without calling her name first. To the tribe he was a warrior of discipline, steady, loyal, controlled. But to Clara he was a storm bottled within a man's body, always on the verge of breaking loose. Each morning she watched the women grind corn, tan hides, and care for children. When she tried to help, they eyed her with suspicion. Still she persisted. She learned the word for water, two, and for fire, co. The children laughed at her accent, but slowly they came closer. By the third day she was teaching a little girl how to braid a strip of cloth. The camp began to see her not as a prisoner, but as something strange and harmless, like a bird that had landed in their midst and hadn't flown away. That evening, when Taza returned from a scouting ride, he found Clara sitting outside her tent, trying to coax a flame from a pile of twigs. Her fingers trembled with frustration. He stood silently behind her for a moment, then knelt and struck the flint with a practiced hand. Sparks caught instantly. She frowned. You might have let me try a little longer. You were wasting wood, he said without expression. I was learning. He looked up, meeting her gaze. The faintest ghost of a smile touched his mouth. You are stubborn, she lifted her chin. So are you. Their eyes held for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he stood and turned away. The fire crackled between them like a living thing. The next morning brought tension. A small group of Apache warriors returned with grim news. Soldiers from Fort Tucson were riding toward the nearby canyon, burning camps along the way. The air around the fire grew taut as bowstrings. The chief spoke rapidly in their tongue. Taza answered, his voice firm but respectful. Clara caught fragments: brother, prison, revenge. Afterward, she approached him. They're going to fight, aren't they? He didn't answer immediately. His face was unreadable. If the soldiers come, yes. You'll kill more men, she said quietly. And they'll send more to kill you. Doesn't it ever end? He turned to her, eyes flashing like flint. You speak as if you know this land. You do not. You come with your wagons, your Bibles, your fences, and you call it peace while our dead lie in the dirt. His words hit like stones. Yet instead of retreating, Clara stepped closer. And you think killing me will make that right? For a moment she thought he might strike her, not from cruelty but from the rawness of truth. Instead he exhaled sharply and turned away. I have not harmed you, he said. Do not test the reason why. But the more he tried to push her away, the more her curiosity drew her back. She saw how he spoke gently to children, how he carried an old woman's water jug when her arms were weak, how his eyes softened when the camp dogs curled at his feet. Beneath the hardened warrior was a man whose heart had been scarred by too much loss. That night, when the moon hung low and red over the desert, Clara walked beyond the camp's edge. The air was cool, the sand soft under her shoes. She looked up at the stars, so many, so close they seemed to whisper. For the first time she prayed not for deliverance but for understanding. Behind her a twig snapped. She spun, startled. Taza stood a few paces away, arms crossed. "It's dangerous to wander," he said. "Coyotes, snakes, soldiers." "I needed air," she replied. "Do I need your permission to breathe too?" His lips twitched. "You have fire in you, Clara Whitmore from Boston. More than your preachers." She folded her arms. "And you have arrogance, Taza of the Chiricahua. More than your chief," for a heartbeat silence. Then unexpectedly laughter, low and genuine. It startled her. It startled him too. The sound melted something between them. "You speak boldly for a prisoner," he said. "Perhaps I was never meant to be one," she answered softly. They stood beneath the stars, the desert wind weaving through their words. In that moment, Clara felt the strange pull of connection, part defiance, part curiosity, part something nameless. It frightened her more than captivity itself. The next day, disaster struck. A small group of soldiers found the outer trail and opened fire on the camp from the ridge. Women screamed. Men grabbed rifles. Clara ducked behind a wagon as bullets tore through the air. Smoke filled her lungs and panic clawed at her throat. She heard Taza's voice, sharp, commanding, rallying his warriors. Then a cry. A child trapped near the cooking fire, her dress caught in the embers. Without thinking, Clara ran. She tore the burning cloth free, scooping the child into her arms. The girl screamed in pain, but she was alive. Clara staggered toward the rocks and saw a soldier aiming his rifle at her. "Down!" someone shouted. Taza slammed into her, knocking her to the ground as the shot cracked. Pain seared across his shoulder. The soldier fell moments later, an Apache arrow in his chest. Clara stared in horror at the blood blooming through Taza's shirt. "You're hurt." "It is nothing," he gritted out. "It's not nothing." She pressed her hand over the wound, feeling the hot pulse beneath. "Stay still." He didn't resist as she tore a strip from her skirt and bound his shoulder. Their faces were inches apart, their breath mingling. When she looked into his eyes, she saw not fury, but weariness and exhaustion that went beyond the flesh. "Why did you save me?" she whispered. His answer was simple. "Because you saved the child." After the attack, the camp buried its dead and moved deeper into the mountains. Clara rode beside Taza, who refused to rest despite his injury. She argued, scolded, even threatened to stop walking if he wouldn't slow down. He only smiled faintly and said, "You sound like a wife." She blushed furiously. "I sound like someone with common sense." "Then the desert will listen to you," he said. "It listens to no one else." That night she helped clean his wound again. The firelight threw gold over his skin, over the hard lines of his jaw and the scar on his temple. When she touched him, his breath caught, not from pain but something deeper. "You should rest," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He met her gaze. "When I rest, I dream of the men who burned my home." "You would not want my dreams." "Then dream of something else," she said softly. "Dream of peace." He shook his head. "Peace is for those who have a home. I have only this." He gestured toward the endless night sky. Clara looked up with him. The stars seemed close enough to touch, scattered like shards of glass across black silk. "Then we share it," she said. "It's the same sky that watched over my father and over you. Perhaps it belongs to neither of us, but it sees us both." He studied her for a long time as though memorizing her face. "You speak strange words, Boston woman." "Maybe," she murmured. "But I think you understand them." He didn't reply, but his eyes said enough. The fire crackled, the desert sighed, and for the first time since her capture, Clara felt safe not because she was guarded, but because she was seen. Somewhere between defiance and forgiveness, between faith and fury, two hearts that should have been enemies began to move toward the same flame. By the time the moon had cycled twice, Clara Whitmore no longer woke each morning wondering if she would die. Instead, she woke to the smell of wood smoke and wild sage, to the chatter of children and the hiss of the cooking fire. She was still a captive by every definition, but her heart no longer beat with fear. The desert had softened her, reshaped her, and against all sense, anchored her. Taza had changed too. His wound healed slowly, leaving a pale scar across his shoulder. He still carried the gravity of leadership, the air of a man who had seen too much of both war and loss. But Clara noticed moments when that burden lifted, like when he played with the children or carved small wooden figures by the fire. He never smiled easily, but when he did, it carried warmth enough to melt the desert frost. The Apache camp thrived despite hardship. Men hunted and rode patrol, while women kept the fires alive and the stories older than memory. Clara began to understand that what she'd once called savagery was instead a civilization of spirit, older than any church steeple in Boston, shaped by wind and stone and survival. These people lived not apart from the land, but as part of it. One morning, the healer, an elderly woman named Nale, beckoned Clara to join her. Nale's face was a roadmap of wrinkles and wisdom. She handed Clara a bundle of herbs and pointed toward a sick child lying in the shade. Without words, she showed her how to crush the leaves and mix them with cool water to ease fever. Clara obeyed, her hands trembling. When the child's breathing steadied hours later, Nale touched Clara's cheek with a gnarled hand and murmured, "Chihutso ayo," golden-hearted woman. The name spread through the camp. For the first time, no one looked at Clara with suspicion. When she passed, people nodded. Some smiled. She was still an outsider, but no longer the enemy. That evening, she found Taza sharpening his knife near the fire. The blade gleamed in the dying light, but his attention wandered toward her as she approached. "Word travels fast," he said, his tone almost teasing. "The healer calls you golden-hearted." Clara knelt opposite him, smoothing her skirt. "That's kind of her, but I think she only meant I did what anyone would do." "No," he said simply. "Not anyone." She looked at him then, the way the firelight bronzed his skin, the way his eyes caught the reflection of stars. Something in his voice had softened. It wasn't gratitude exactly, but a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer strangers. That night, the sky burned with more stars than Clara had ever seen. The air was cool and smelled of rain, though the desert hadn't seen a drop in weeks. She found herself near the edge of camp again, gazing at the horizon. Taza joined her without a word, carrying 2 bowls of stew. He handed her one and sat beside her, cross-legged. "Do you ever miss your home?" she asked after a while. He stirred his stew, thoughtful. "I miss my brother," he said, "and the sound of my mother's voice when she sang to the morning sun. But a man cannot miss what was never his. This land, these stars, they are not mine. I only walk beneath them." Clara listened, feeling the ache behind his words. "In Boston," she said, "we live in houses stacked side by side. The streets smell of smoke and rain. There's always a sound, horses, bells, carriages. And when it snows, everything feels smaller, quieter." He turned toward her, intrigued. "Snow," he repeated. "Cold that falls from the sky?" "Yes," she smiled faintly. "You'd hate it," he chuckled softly. "Then perhaps I should see it one day." The sound of his laughter was rare, fragile as glass. She didn't dare breathe too loudly for fear of breaking it. They sat in silence for a while, their bowls empty, the stars thick above them. Then Clara spoke, her voice low. "Your brother, what was he like?" Taza's expression shifted, the light in his eyes dimming. Kohana was younger but wiser. He could make peace with anyone. He believed that words were stronger than rifles. When soldiers came, he tried to talk. They took him instead. He paused, his jaw tightening. They said he would stand trial for raids he never led. "He will hang before summer if I do nothing." Clara's breath caught. "That's why you captured me," she realized. "To trade me for him." He nodded once. "Your people value white skin and English words. You are the only thing they will answer for." Her heart sank, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. His loyalty to his brother was something pure and terrible, a force she could not condemn. Yet the thought of returning to her people, to the ones who had burned his home, filled her with shame. "Do you still plan to trade me?" she asked softly. Taza looked at her for a long moment, as if the question itself hurt him. "When I took you, yes. Now," he exhaled slowly, "now I am not sure what I believe." Her throat tightened. "And what do you want to believe?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pouch and drew out a small carved figure, an eagle with outstretched wings no larger than her palm. He placed it in her hands. "My father taught me to carve," he said. "This is for you. The eagle flies highest because it fears nothing. Keep it. Maybe it will teach you." The wood was smooth, warm from his touch. "Thank you," she whispered. He stood and turned toward the camp. Tomorrow we ride north. I must find word of my brother. She rose too. Then I'm coming with you. He looked back sharply. It will be dangerous. Then you'll need someone stubborn enough to argue with you, she said, meeting his gaze. He stared at her for a long time before sighing, a small reluctant smile ghosting across his lips. You are not like other women. Neither are you like other men. That was the closest they came to a confession. The next morning, they rode together before dawn, the horizon bleeding light. Clara's skirts were torn, her hair unbraided, but she no longer cared. The air smelled of creosote and dust. Taza rode ahead silent as the desert cat, his figure framed by the rising sun. They stopped at midday near a canyon spring. Taza drank first, then handed her his canteen. When their fingers brushed, the contact was brief but electric, two worlds touching without permission. She sat beside him, watching dragonflies skim the water. What if your brother cannot be freed? She asked. He didn't look at her. Then I will bring him peace in another way. You mean vengeance, she said quietly. He glanced at her then, his eyes fierce. If they hang him, what would you have me do? Pray? She swallowed hard. Yes, she said. Pray. For something better than more blood. For a moment, he looked as if he might argue. But then his shoulders lowered, the anger fading. You speak of peace as if it were a choice, he murmured. Maybe it is, she said. Maybe we've both forgotten how to make it. They sat in silence again, the only sound the trickle of water and the whisper of wind through the canyon. The world around them felt vast, eternal, indifferent. Yet in that indifference something sacred pulsed. Life, survival, and the fragile thread that now bound them together. That night, as they made camp under a blanket of stars, Taza handed her a strip of leather tied with turquoise beads. Wear this, he said. It will tell the spirits you are under my protection. Clara smiled faintly. And who will protect me from you? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You don't need protection from me, he said quietly. You never did. When she lay down that night, the desert cold wrapped around her, but she was warm inside. She traced the carved eagle in her hand and listened to the steady rhythm of Taza's breathing nearby. In the darkness, she understood that what tethered her to this place wasn't captivity anymore. It was connection. She was no longer simply a woman stolen by a warrior. She was a witness to two worlds colliding, trying to find mercy in each other's fire. The desert had its own kind of fury. It didn't shout or roar. It whispered warnings through the wind, carried dust that could flay skin, and turned gentle rains into rivers of mud. When the storm came that evening, it was not a surprise, only the inevitable test of endurance that life out here demanded. Taza and Clara had been riding north for 2 days, following the winding paths carved by centuries of hooves and storms alike. The air had grown heavy with moisture, a strange metallic tang that Clara could taste on her tongue. The sky, once bronze and endless, had thickened with bruised clouds rolling in from the mountains. By sunset, thunder rumbled like distant drums. Taza reined in his horse and glanced at the sky. We must find shelter, he said. This storm will not be kind. Clara nodded, clutching the carved eagle that hung from her neck. They pushed on until they found a hollow beneath a sandstone ridge, half hidden by mesquite and thornbrush. The horses were tied under an overhang, and Taza gathered dry branches from the edges of the canyon. By the time the rain began, they had a small fire flickering between them. It came first as a mist, soft and cool against Clara's face. Then the heavens broke open. Sheets of rain lashed the earth, and the wind howled through the canyon like a wounded spirit. The fire sputtered and hissed but refused to die. Taza crouched close, shielding the flame with his broad back, his hair dark and slick with rain. Clara watched him work, her heart beating faster than the storm outside. You act like you can command the elements, she said, half smiling. He looked over his shoulder, rainwater streaming down his face. I cannot command, he said. I only endure. Do you ever tire of enduring? She asked softly. He paused, then turned fully toward her. Yes, he said simply. But what choice do I have? The wind screamed through the canyon, snatching their words. The rain pounded harder. Taza gestured for her to move deeper into the hollow, where the rock roof sloped low. He followed, crouching beside her in the dim light. The fire glowed faintly, painting his face in warm, flickering gold. His eyes, dark unyielding, met hers across the small space. For a moment, the world outside ceased to exist. The storm, the soldiers, the endless desert, all of it fell away. "You should rest," he said. "The storm will last till dawn." "I can't," she murmured. "Not with that noise." He tilted his head, listening. "You fear thunder?" "I fear what comes after it," she said, hugging her knees. "When it's quiet again. When everything broken is still broken." He studied her, his gaze softer than she'd ever seen it. Then, without a word, he lifted his blanket and spread it across both of them. She stiffened in surprise, but his tone was calm, matter of fact. "Cold kills faster than rain," he said. She hesitated, then shifted closer. The warmth of his body radiated through the thick fabric. Outside, lightning split the sky, flooding the cave with white light. Thunder followed instantly, shaking the ground. Clara flinched despite herself. Taza turned his head slightly toward her. "The storm fears those who listen," he said quietly. "It only tests you." She let out a shaky breath. "Then I must be failing its test." He smiled faintly. "Not yet," hours passed. The rain softened to a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. Clara could feel her muscles relaxing, her pulse slowing. The air smelled of wet stone and sage. She leaned her head back against the rock and exhaled. "Tell me something," she said after a long silence. "When this is over, when you find your brother, what will you do?" Taza's expression darkened. "If he lives, we will go south, beyond the mountains. The white men do not hunt there. And if he doesn't?" He looked at the fire, its reflection dancing in his eyes. "Then I will still go south. But I will carry his name with me." Clara nodded slowly. "You love him deeply." "He is my blood," he said. "But love is not always peace. Sometimes it burns," she smiled faintly. "I think love always burns." He looked at her then, really looked, as though seeing her for the first time not as a captive or a foreigner, but as something rare and fragile and dangerous all at once. The space between them seemed to hum with energy. "You speak of love," he said. "Do you know it?" She hesitated. "I thought I did once. Back home I was to marry a man, Andrew. My father arranged it. He was kind, respectable, safe, but I didn't feel anything when he touched my hand. Not like—" She caught herself, her cheeks flushing. "Not like this," Taza's gaze deepened. "Like what?" Clara swallowed. "Like being near you." The confession hung in the air, fragile and impossible to take back. Thunder rumbled again, distant now. Taza's breath caught, but he didn't move closer. He seemed torn between instinct and restraint. "You should not say such things," he said quietly. "Why not?" she whispered. "Because you're Apache and I'm not? Because the world says it's wrong? Because if I listen," he said, his voice low and rough, "I will not stop." For a long, trembling heartbeat, neither moved. The rain outside softened to a whisper, and the fire burned low, its light painting their faces in amber. Then, without thinking, Clara reached for his hand. It was rough and warm, calloused from a lifetime of survival. He didn't pull away. Their fingers interlaced, awkwardly at first, then naturally, like the meeting of two currents in the same stream. When he spoke, his voice was a whisper, barely audible over the rain. "You are foolish," he murmured. "Maybe," she said, "but I'm not afraid anymore." He turned toward her fully then, the blanket falling slightly from his shoulder. The scent of him, smoke, rain, earth, filled her lungs. His hand rose to her cheek, his thumb tracing a line along her jaw. She closed her eyes. When his lips found hers, it wasn't gentle. It was hungry and hesitant all at once, like something born of months of silence and restraint. She kissed him back, tasting rain and fire and everything in between. The storm outside might as well have been the pulse in their veins. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, neither spoke. The world felt new, fragile, infinite. He pressed his forehead to hers. "You are a storm," he whispered. She smiled against his lips. "Then you are my shelter." They slept little that night, their hands still tangled beneath the blanket. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The air smelled clean, sharp with renewal. Water glistened on the rocks like glass. Clara woke to find Taza already up, feeding the horses. The fire had died, but the warmth between them had not. When he noticed her watching, he gave a small nod, silent acknowledgement of what had changed. They didn't speak of the night, but the distance between them had vanished. When they rode on, she rode beside him, not behind, and though the path ahead was uncertain, neither feared it any more. For in the heart of that desert storm, they had found something the world could neither name nor take away, a love born not of rescue but of recognition. The storm had left the desert washed clean, the air sharp and sweet with new life. The sun rose like a fire rekindled from ashes, spilling gold across the canyons. Clara and Taza rode side by side through the silence, their clothes damp, their hearts changed. Neither spoke of what had passed between them. They didn't have to. Every look, every glance, every breath of shared air carried the weight of a truth too powerful to name aloud. Love had rooted itself in the space between their worlds, fragile yet fierce as the first bloom after rain. By midday, they reached the high ridge overlooking the Army outpost at Fort Tucson. The land below shimmered with heat. Soldiers moved between tents, their rifles gleaming. And there, bound, battered, but alive, stood Kahana, Taza's brother. Clara gasped. He's still breathing. Taza's jaw tightened. They have not yet taken his life. There is time. He dismounted, eyes scanning the terrain, counting guards, noting blind spots. Every movement was deliberate, calm, lethal. Clara knew this side of him, the warrior, the protector, and it both terrified and awed her. You can't go down there alone, she said. I must, he replied. This is my blood, and what then? She demanded. You'll kill the guards, free him, and then what? They'll send more. They'll hunt you again. He looked at her, his expression hard but pained. Would you have me do nothing? She stepped closer. No, I would have you live. His silence said more than words could. He was already halfway gone, his heart set on a path that offered no return. Clara grabbed his arm, desperate. Please, Taza. If you die down there, everything we've fought for, everything we've felt, it dies too. He turned, placing his hands on her shoulders. Clara, he said softly, you have given me something I did not think I could feel again. Hope. But hope without honor is hollow. Tears welled in her eyes. Then let me come with you. His gaze softened, but he shook his head. No, if I fail, you must ride east. Find safety. I won't leave you. You must, he said firmly, because if I do not return, you must live enough for us both. He cupped her face and kissed her forehead. A promise, a farewell, and a prayer all at once. Then, before she could protest again, he was gone, slipping down the ridge like a shadow swallowed by sunlight. The hours that followed felt like years. Clara watched from her hiding place as Taza crept toward the fort. The guards laughed and smoked by the gate, unaware of the storm about to break. When the moment came, it was swift. A rifle cracked. A shout echoed. Chaos erupted. Clara's heart pounded as she saw Taza dart between tents, arrows flashing like streaks of light. He moved with the deadly grace of a man who had nothing left to lose. Then amidst the smoke, she saw him reach Kahana. The two brothers clasped arms, a brief, fierce reunion. But before they could escape, more soldiers poured from the barracks. Gunfire ripped through the air. Taza turned, shielding his brother, and the sound that followed split the world in two. Clara screamed his name, her voice lost to the wind. By the time she reached the fort, it was nearly dusk. The soldiers had already ridden out, chasing phantoms across the sand. She crept inside the half-ruined stockade, her skirts torn, her hands shaking. And there, lying in the dust beside the open gate, was Taza. He was still breathing, but barely. Blood darkened his shirt, pooling beneath him like spilled ink. Kahana knelt beside him, his own arm wounded but his eyes fierce with grief. Clara fell to her knees. Taza, no, please. His eyes fluttered open. When they found her, they softened instantly. You should not have come, he rasped. I told you I wouldn't leave you, she whispered, clutching his hand. Not ever. He smiled faintly, the expression faint but radiant. You always argue. Then argue with me now, she begged. Stay. Kahana looked between them, his jaw tight. He fought well, he said quietly. The soldiers are gone. He saved me. Clara pressed her forehead to Taza's. Then let me save you. But he only shook his head. No one can save the sun from setting, he murmured. But it always rises again. She sobbed, her tears falling onto his face. You can't leave me. He lifted a trembling hand, brushing the tears away. Do not weep for me. You showed me there is more than war. More than hate. She clutched his hand tighter. Then live for that. I will, he whispered. In you. His hand went still. For a long moment there was nothing but silence, the kind that crushes the heart flat. The wind stirred dust around them, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. Kohana bowed his head, murmuring a prayer in his tongue. Clara didn't move. She held him as the last light faded, until the stars came out, cold and endless, over the man who had taught her what it meant to live beneath them. Weeks passed. Clara and Kohana buried Taza in the high place overlooking the valley he loved. They marked his grave with a ring of white stones and an eagle feather tied with turquoise, the same one he had given her. Kohana was quiet, but when he spoke, his voice carried the strength of his brother. He said once, he told her, that the spirit of the eagle carries the ones who love the sky. When you see one, he is there. After that, Kohana rode south with his people, and Clara was left alone beneath the vast desert sky. She stayed until spring. She learned to live as he had, by the sun and stars, by silence and instinct. When she finally rode east, it was not to return to the life she'd known, but to carry his story forward. She no longer belonged to Boston, or to the world that had built fences around everything sacred. She belonged to the open sky. Years later, travelers spoke of a white woman who lived alone near the borderlands, tending a small garden by a canyon stream. She was kind to the Apache who passed her way, and they called her Taza's star. Some said she could speak their tongue. Others claimed she spoke to the wind itself. Every dawn she would walk to a ridge of red stone and look toward the horizon, where the sun rose golden through the dust. Sometimes an eagle would circle high above her, its wings cutting across the light, and she would smile. Right here, she would whisper. For even though the world had torn them apart, love had found its place not in a home or a name, but in the endless promise of the dawn, beneath the same sky that had witnessed their beginning. Clara's heart remained forever entwined with his, two souls, bound by fire and forgiveness, rising together each morning like the sun itself.